When I started this podcast, I was like, well, I'm going to make what I want to make rather than what I feel might be the most popular or the most successful. And then, of course, the people gather and they're like, oh, this is what I hoped I might encounter one day. The ceremony and the ritual that I do in my life isn't always just for me as well. And it's part of the way that I show up for things that are happening in the world. And we have a lot of power in our ceremony and in that space, recognizing how we bring that in for us and how we bring it in for each other and for our connection to the earth and on a much wider space. Welcome, dear souls. This is our 200th episode, and it's 7 years since we launched this podcast and 13 since the whole project began. In taking a moment to acknowledge the journey here, it's quite something to me how the world has changed during this time and how much came up from the unseen world into our global experience. For this episode, you have both a conversation and some sprinklings of you, our wonderful community, sharing what it has been to you over the years. Some of you sent in voice notes and some of you joined me in our online celebration space and shared there. It's been very special to hear from you. As for me, the whole reason to do this as a podcast is that we can all be transformed as a global collective through these conversations. Otherwise, there'd be no need to share my experiences and my curiosities so loudly, unless I believe that by doing so, it creates a potent space of transformation and understanding ourselves differently for all of us that listen. This episode is also the last of our series this year, and we will be taking 4 weeks over the transition into 2024, coming back on air on the 18th of January. During this time, please stay engaged with us by joining our membership, which is in the process of transformation itself. I'll be sharing more about that in our newsletter over the coming weeks. We will have a soul space on December the 27th if you need to come into collective prayer and activation in the midst of the holiday time. It will be a sweet, tender, and nourishing moment. I have been working on a new course called Reclaim Your Intuition that will launch in the new year. And I have a few spaces on offer now at a massively reduced price so that I can witness you going through it and hear your experiences before we share it wider. You can find information about this in our newsletter as well. Part of our 200th gathering was a moment of prayer for collective liberation. We practiced holding our grief in one hand and our gratitude in the other, as there were both tears and laughter. And with that, I offer a prayer that over the next 4 weeks, our world changes for the better, that humanity rises, and that we experience a miracle much more miraculous than an overweight white man in a hat shimmying down a chimney. I share these beautiful words of Jaya John. He says, collective freedom is not a seasonal hobby you undertake, not a charitable donation, vacation, tourism, or trend. It is your way of life, a dedication, devotion, decision to be, a perpetual ceremony that heals the whole of us. And I want to share these words also from Jaya John, which feel very resonant for me as I reflect on the past 7 years. And if I would have chosen to start a podcast with the intention in my heart that I have been holding, if I had known what was coming and what I would have to move towards. He says, this right here, right now is the revolution of our time. If you're waiting for a more convenient one, you're going to miss the only one. Revolutions are never convenient. They come with mourning, are thrust upon us. We do not choose them like vacations or homes. They choose us. Do not wait for history to tell you what to do. It will be too late. History is always easier and less accountable than the present moment. Like now, whatever you dream of doing on the urgent behalf of humanity, do it now. During the recording of this conversation, I had really bad food poisoning, my brain and body slow. I've had lots of viruses and illnesses over the past few years, perhaps on and off since I started the podcast. I've been reflecting a lot on our fragility and our obsession with comfort in the dominant Western culture of being well and feeling well. And I am deeply inspired by those who find resilience in ways I could never imagine. Those who haven't slept for well over 2 months and are still pulling bodies of their friends out of the rubble, of mothers around the world needing to feed their families with very few resources and finding a way, of those walking and swimming through places they don't know to find a safe home. We live in this unequal, troubled world. And yet the one thing humans are so good at is finding moments of beauty, no matter what. A reverence for beauty is one of the tools we have for resilience. That beauty sometimes is grief, sometimes gratitude, sometimes going out of our way for our shared humanity. As we close this year, this is my prayer, that we all become more courageous in reverence of beauty and everyone's right to it, that we learn to heal to the roots, to make space for our souls, and to care for what is precious, all life in its interconnected waves. For this episode, I invited a dear friend of mine, Floss Barnett-Howland, to come and create a ceremony with me and to host the conversation with me. Floss and I met over a decade ago as part of an earth-based spiritual community. Over the years, she's held space for me in some complicated issues that arose there, meeting with systems of oppression and how we experience them in our daily lives and our community. And in such sweet and tender ways, including 2 rituals that she wove for me over the past 18 months. She has listened to the podcast since the start and been a supporter and part of the membership. And so it felt perfect to welcome her to host this. Floss has had her fingers in many pots and is a wearer of many hats. She is actually rarely to be seen without one. Starting as a dancer, she naturally journeyed into movement and energy work and is now a practitioner of acutonics, which is a sound-based integrative therapy, and she is a fellow of the Shiatsu Society, the Japanese ancient art of balance and well-being. Very much a woman of serving and tending to community, friends and family, she loves to make ceremony and create space, which fits perfectly with her artistic direction and styling. She is an artistic willow weaver for interactive theatre walkabout, a creative activist, and a self-proclaimed dodgy poet. For 8 years now, she's been organising a community choir and is an avid daily ice bather. In fact, an ice bath in her garden on a sunny day was one of my most enjoyable cold water experiences to date and got me into cold water swimming. And I have taken part in her choir and joined in a beautiful community singing event with it. For more than 20 years, with her partner Magnus, Floss has dived deep into the parenting journey and what it is to people make. Their 2 wonderful children, Jazz and Obi, have recently flown the nest. Floss is now exploring what it is to be in transition with a patchwork career and an empty nest. Well, not completely, with her mother cohabitating. In this vulnerable place, she is open to what new shapes and ceremonies will appear as she stirs the pot. In this conversation called Celebrating All That We Are, in reverence of a beautiful future, we explore the question, how have we and the world changed in this past 7 years? I hope that you enjoy this episode and it invites in more of all that you are and a deeper reverence for ceremony and beauty. Welcome to All That We Are with me, your host, Amisha Gadiali. On this show, we explore the weave between activism, the sacred, creativity, and regeneration, the spaces where our inner and outer worlds dance. From healing trauma to nature connection, to new technologies to ancient wisdom, It's time for us to move beyond silos and into an integrated way of being. Every one of us has ideas and personal experiences to share that can lead us to a more beautiful future. Despite the challenges we face as a global community or the pressures we meet in our daily lives, when we stop and dare to listen, to ask ourselves the big questions, and to share what we are already doing and envisioning, we create the futures of our wildest dreams. And we begin to embody all that we are becoming, and all that is possible.
I think I'd like to jump straight in and say how honoured I felt and excited I am to be here celebrating 200 episodes and the 7th year of your podcast. What a moment that is in terms of a cycle, and how that brings in reflection often, like the 7-year itch is actually more about 7 years to reflect and the cycles that we have in life. And 7 is represented in so many cultures around the world. And in Chinese medicine, I've studied as a 7-year cycle for your qi. Also in the cycle of the moon and the 4 sevens, and each part of the waxing and the waning. So just in that reflection, how are you feeling?
Thank you for the question.
Yeah.
I mean, I just realised quite recently that we were at 7 years, and that 200 was worth stopping and having a pause and a bit of a celebration about. I feel like it can be really easy just to keep going with things and keep making things happen. And for me, a lot of it is guided in a way that I can't articulate, because it's not on a plan, on a piece of paper or a document with timelines. It just has emerged, and it's grown and evolved as I have. 7 years is a really long time in a human's life. And of course, we move into a whole different cycle with our own becoming. And when I now reflect on it, on even starting a podcast, at that time, there weren't lots of podcasts, and there weren't really hardly any based in the UK. It wasn't a thing in the way that it is now, and it was a very different space. And for me, what really happened with two things. There was a really deep yearning to create a real space of the soul. I didn't find that there were that many spaces that I could go where I could enter in something that felt alive and really gave space for my soul and for the interconnected weave of everything. And now there are so many of those spaces, or maybe not so many, but there are more. And so it doesn't feel like such a desert, but at that time it really did. I was in these different worlds, coming from sustainable activism, sustainable fashion, political activism, tech for good. I'd been in these quite heady, big worlds where we were trying to make change. And then I'd been on, parallel to that, a really deep spiritual journey, and then a journey kind of into learning different modalities and practices and traditions to hold. I was just finding this disconnect between all of those different spaces, which I would say has really changed a lot in the 7 years. Actually, I notice it just in bumping into people at events that 7 years ago I would have never imagined them to have gone to that kind of thing. Like, they weren't in that place open to those kind of things. And it feels like just those lines between the spiritual and the body and culture and how we make change in the world have all really interwoven into a web that's much more tangible now. As a culture, sort of meaning like the Western dominant culture, we've become more embodied and also more open. maybe not everyone, maybe I'm also in a bubble.
Yeah.
Maybe I created a bubble that then brought lots of people together. But I remember in my 20s, early 30s, that I had a lot of like interviews with TV companies about shows that we were going to make, about things that were really important to me. And they just wanted to make them really silly and fun. I played that game for a while and I found it really unfulfilling. And then I thought, actually, there's something my soul's craving that's much different to the silly and the fun, that's actually where there's space, and there's space for all the complexity. My experience of the world 7 years ago, and the places that I was in, was that everyone needed to have the answer all the time. It was like, yeah, this is what we need to do about this, and this is what we need to do about that, and here's the whole thing. And it felt like where we're moving as humanity has got more complicated. Maybe it's always been complicated, but it felt with climate and a deeper understanding of other systems of oppression that there's a different framing. And it's quite wild how much has changed.
It is. In 7 years, we're just talking 7 years here, which feels a long time to have had your podcast going for in one way, but another way, hearing you reflect, it's just, wow, how much really has changed in the world in 7 years.
Yeah. So this was before the most prominent like reports on climate change. This is before Me Too. This is before Black Lives Matter. This is where so many things weren't in the public domain. They still existed and people were experiencing them, but they weren't talked about. And so it's really wild that this period of our lives as a global community has been a period that's been so revealing and with so much coming up to the surface. And it's been interesting then holding this space and then needing to respond and find the way that feels right and in integrity and offers like the most useful explorations during all of these kind of unfoldings.
Yeah.
Which is different to what I thought when I started, which was that it was going to be something different, something that felt more like creating media. And now it doesn't really feel like that. It feels like something much deeper than that. And perhaps also I've really let go of it needing to be anything or trying to make it anything. And I've really let it guide me, and I've let myself learn and unlearn from every single episode. And every episode is transformative, and every encounter along the way has been transformative. Yeah, that's been a wild ride for me and for so many others, I imagine, that have listened along the way.
Yeah. I think what comes across a lot is how you've been open to exploring. And in that is your bubbling intuition all the time that you knew from the filming, how you actually wanted to go deeper. It's been interesting as I've come thinking, how could I honour you? How could I be here and honour this moment for you and be here asking you the questions? And shoe on the other foot is how interesting it is you've got to such a place where you really trust. I really feel you really trusting in the process and how you create space for that. And like you say, you're not holding on to anything. It feels like you were saying about the listeners being with you on your journey, and how it's been a real privilege and inspiration listening for these 7 years, having known you before that, how it is that you share so much of yourself on the podcasts And this is a really beautiful thing, because it always is that you're inviting in conversation rather than it being interview, which is essentially what you're doing. But it always feels like a conversation, like you're having a chat with your mate or a chat on the phone. And it has such a relaxedness to it. And you really shape that in your trust of the unknown, when we're in a world that's in its distorted masculine, holding on to certainty and measurement. And you're like, I want to just let go and see what comes and see what rises and see what happens. And so do you get any feedback about that along the way from people? And how has it been sharing so much of yourself along the way?
Well, when you you say that, I'm like, oh, I feel a bit vulnerable suddenly. Because in the moment, it's not really, it doesn't feel like that. And it's not like I imagine or I plan, I'm going to share this or I'm going to share that. But what I find really interesting about being human is that we all have some quite universal inner world experiences. And I've experienced that time and time again in a lot of the deeper work and unfolding that I've done and the modalities that I've held space in and trained in. And there is one view, which is to keep things really tight and present all the time and always show up with your mask and show up with something that's just so polished and like, you know, even we could do it from the podcast interviews where we just then make a 15-minute like snappy thing. But I just don't feel like life or humans are like that. And I've never been a small talker. And I guess maybe I have always been one of those people where I come at it without judgment and without comparing and without any sense that things have to be a certain way or they mean something that's like negative. And I feel that a lot of people hold a lot in, and that's what's got us where we are. If I'm able to share something that opens up a sense of, I've had that experience, and maybe you've experienced it in sharing circles, it's just so powerful when people share and it's not the polished mask anymore, and you're actually receiving something that is real, and it makes you feel less alone in your understandings of your life and yourself. And also, I feel at this time that we're at in the world, this is the space that we need to lean into, because we are being asked to really clear through so much, and it's big. And if we are able to all step in and do it, we could create a very different world. It's not easy. And so I trust that by being myself fully and showing up as myself, and maybe it isn't, maybe there are people that make fun of me or do whatever, I don't know, but who knows? I've never really thought about that. But I feel like most people probably connect to that deeper experience and have so many of the same questions, are also tired of having lived in a world where no one says what they mean, and everything is very hidden. It's very much like that in British culture, and there's a lot of like rules, and it's not really about being yourself and bringing your whole self, and even being okay not understanding what the future's going to bring or how something is going to affect us. And I feel like then when we're willing to go on those journeys together, that's when something transforms. And although all the guests that I've had, they've created really beautiful books or whatever it is that I'm bringing them on to talk about, I didn't want to create a space where they just regurgitate that, because people can go and read their book.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to create a space where I'm like a stop on a marketing tour, although it's interesting, that's coming up more in the way that podcasts have changed over the years. Yeah, and I'm meeting a bit more of that. And yeah, it's an interesting dance. But I wanted these conversations and these spaces to be rich in and of themselves, and to be of a moment that is a moment that is unique. And so that's where that kind of came from, was wanting to not just have the same conversation that those people have all the time. And what has unfolded from that is that many of the guests, and not all of them, there's a few that have found it really, really challenging, but many of the guests have shared that they have found being on this podcast a transformative experience for them, that has helped them to understand themselves differently and their work differently. And they've found themselves saying things that they've never said before, that's helped them to get clearer on the next part of their work or their journey. And I feel like that's what it's about. It's about creating something that's alive, and it's alive for everyone in it.
Yeah.
And doesn't have to exist in the way of marketing and repetition and playing safe.
That actually having this moment, having a shared experience, creates something else unique and special. And I feel that in ceremony can really happen. A good friend, musician, and he was saying that the experience of playing, and I was like, I wish I could play an instrument. And they would all play, there'd be a group of people playing around a fire. And he said, no, the joy is you come and you bring your spirit and you dance, and it's the sounds that are moving you, and we're feeling you moved, and we're feeling the spirit in you, the spirit that's coming from us and the music, and it's going through you, and you're expressing that. And that's something really beautiful in ceremony and in your interviews that feels quite different from the norm. So we're sitting here in front of a couple of candles, big, beautiful candles that we brought to represent 100 episodes for each candle.
Amazing. Thank
So
you
we've
for
got
bringing
200
those.
episodes here, encircled by 7 singing bowls, a bowl for each year. And it feels quite beautiful and special to bring this in. I was thinking, what could we do in here that would honour it, that isn't just in our thoughtful space, but is in this sort of tangible and marking of time, and how seeing something and feeling something can change. How do you feel about marking these moments, and what does that mean to you in ceremony?
Oh, I feel great about marking them. It means a lot. It's really now part of the way that I live, of holding little rituals and ceremonies for things that are important, whether I do them on my own with no other humans, but with the spirits, or whether we join together and come together in these spaces to honor together. And I really feel that when I'm in those spaces, that's when I feel the most alive and the most like I'm here doing what I'm here to do as a human in this particular body, having this like experience. And I suppose that's for me why every podcast is a ceremony in itself. It's not coming from this intellectual place. And I find that as much ritual and ceremony as we can all welcome into our lives, the more beauty we're creating.
When it becomes so much a part of your normal everyday life, we are behaving like it's really normal. And I'm thinking about some people that I know, or some people that might be listening, that be questioning how much ceremony they have in their lives. But I know that when I go to church, and which is very rarely, but if I'm there in a wedding or funeral, it's a normal, accepted ceremonial time. Or in Indian culture and lots of cultures around the world with so many ceremonies, and yet in England we seem to have lost that or shunned that or push it away, or oh, it's magic, or it's witchy, or it's black magic, or it's been an interesting journey with that. And recently went to Diwali with some friends, and marking these moments in time, even if it's down to marking the change of seasons of the equinoxes and the solstice. So having this moment in Diwali where it's only something I've been doing for very few years with these really close friends of ours, suddenly just that helps me hold light, like a pilot light or a candle light in me through the darkness, through the winter that I used to struggle with so much. And these things are so beautiful, and I look forward to when ceremony is absolutely seen by everybody as something to celebrate and be normal, that it becomes like birthdays are normal. Yeah,
absolutely. I want to honour what you managed to pull off at my birthday, which was incredibly hectic, in a pub on a cold day with loads of little kids under the age of 5. And it could have just been a gathering where people chatted, ate some food, had a few drinks and left. But coming together and doing something together that honoured why we were there, not only did that make it more meaningful for me, but it made it more meaningful for everyone that was part of it, and memorable and co-created, and the energetic then presence and holding that then came from it was so different to had it just have been a normal party.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like a lot. It was like, 45 minutes or something?
Yeah.
Of everyone contributing, and we all went outside and we sang together and moved in waves together, and we all brought something in and made an earth altar together, and then everyone co-created a poem and read it, and it's one of those things that I will never forget, and it allowed the spirit of everyone to really, really like come together in this beautiful moment. And I feel like at our core, we all want celebrations to be more like that.
Yeah.
And less like just sort of random, and to feel that they're held in some sort of way and that they invite something. When we actually question, well, why did a lot of this get lost from our culture? It's not a great answer. It's an answer that's pretty dark, and it's an answer that's connected to stripping us from our power and that connection to the divine, and also our ability to really come together in community in a really intentional way. And now so many of our celebrations are all about shopping and gluttony rather than about what they're actually about. There's something really beautiful about reclaiming rituals, times of the year when I've gone on pilgrimages on all of the equinoxes and the solstices. I've had different experiences, especially in winter, which can be really tough, but it's allowed me to understand and root into winter in a different way. And for me, when I did my priestess initiation, what I loved so much about that was that it was like so welcoming of all the ceremonies. And they are there in my culture, that you will have a special ceremony for everything that you do, and everything has to be done on a certain day. And if you buy a house, you enter the house on a certain day and you enter at a certain time, and that will be different based on you and the house and all kinds of different factors. And you do it with a ceremony, a ritual. There'll be certain things that you do when you first enter that house. It's living in a way where we actually recognize that the unseen world is there, because it is there. And whether we want to acknowledge it or not, it is there. And if we don't acknowledge it, it can run havoc in society and culture. And it does. I was talking this week about this with a friend who was going through something, and we were talking about how, like, it sounds like this person that they were talking about, there was some sort of like spirit possession or something like that was more deep than what you can kind of get to with a psychiatrist. And not even everyone's willing to go to a therapist about something, but the unseen world's there, and we've all experienced it in different moments, whether we've walked into a room and felt uncomfortable in a certain room, or whether in moments where we might be intoxicated in some way, we've encountered something. You know, alcohol is called spirits. And so it's all there. It's there in our culture, and it's not that far back. And yet this denying it and the pretending that we're all shallow that often comes out, it's just not true. When I started this podcast, I was like, well, I'm going to make what I want to make rather than what I feel might be the most popular or the most successful. And then, of course, the people gather and they're like, oh, this is what I hoped I might encounter one day. And I just feel like if we live in a way where we really acknowledge our transitions and our rites of passages, and we lose that energy of, it's the same thing as calling things like woo-woo and strange, the disempowering that we do of the sacred all the time, of our relationship with it, like the disrespecting of it, and then the disrespecting of each other. But then we don't do that in so many ways, because American politicians will talk about God all the time. So it's really interesting where this disconnect comes in culturally, because it is actually there in the high places, in the decision-making places. When you watch the king's coronation, that's a very heavily religious ceremony. It's not just a party because he's now king. And so why aren't we honoring ourselves fully and marking all of those occasions? And yeah, I just started a journey to be an interfaith minister, which came as a bit of a surprise, but actually it's really beautiful because we're doing it in this very earth-based and obviously bringing in all of the different wisdom traditions from the world way. And it will be to do weddings and funerals and rites of passage, but also with spiritual accompaniment and deep listening. And so much of it is what all that we are has already taken me through. So when I was learning the process of deep listening, I was like, oh, this is just how I do my podcast episodes. But nobody told me this is how you do it. It was more that I just gave myself permission. And then it also helped that where I was slightly wavering with wanting to do it like that, the first conversation sort of happened quite spontaneously, where there wasn't time to go and like prepare a whole thing and make it a certain way. And then it just opened and I was like, whew. And then I realized that I'd never heard that person speak in that way before. And I'd never heard those kind of things said. And then, and then that just gave me that like, okay, and now we can keep going with this, because actually everybody wants their soul to be more in the mix of our lives. And I feel like that's what ceremony really does.
Beautiful. I've also heard you say often, actually, how much your journey is here to help others shine and be in service and help them remember who they are, which ceremony really helps.
Thank you for tuning in. If you are enjoying this episode, do join our membership For a small contribution, you can be part of our community, where we deepen the conversation and offer spaces of learning and embodiment. As a member, you are a patron supporting the making of this show, keeping the episodes full length, free and accessible for all. And you receive a number of benefits, such as monthly soul space, going deeper sessions, access to our library of workshops, and discounts on all our online and in-person experiences. Our membership is what makes us able to make this show and stay advertising free in a world that is always trying to sell us stuff we don't need. Head to allthatweare.org/membership to find out more and join today.
Now we're going to offer for you all to join in a little ceremony with us to celebrate and mark this special moment of Amisha's podcast as she reaches the 200th episode and 7-year anniversary since it began in 2017. And in front of us are 2 large glowing candles marking 100 episodes each. And circling the candles, we have singing bowls to represent the 7 years. Amisha's going to ding the bowls to give space for reflection on these years and episodes and all that's been weaving in the world alongside through the years. Maybe we could tune in to our own journeys and what it's been to have this podcast to listen to along the way, and how helpful it can be to listen to change makers and positive creators in difficult times and how they inspire us. So, Amisha, here's the mallet, and let us take a moment to drop into the magic.
I'm going to start over here with the Inception 2017.
Inviting in the inception, the birth, the seeding, the germinating, the start, and the playfulness. Might be interesting to see whether anything comes up for each year or each sound or feeling, and inviting in this all that you've brought in, the trust and the exploration and the playfulness that you bring so well to this podcast.
I feel to invite in with each year, had now the first and the second, just this space of all of you listening, allowing what came through for you that year to land in your body, and maybe remembering what you were going through during that year. Moving now into year 3, 2019. Into 2020. 2021. 2022. And now here where we are, coming up to the end of 2023. It's amazing just taking that moment. I could remember and feel all of these different things for each year. Things that were happening in the world, things that were happening in my own life, guests that came on, how my understanding of the world changed.
All that's been weaving.
Yeah, all that we are.
And so much has been running concurrently with your journey, with your 7-year podcast, with your retreats, your courses, your community creating, your book, and just seeing these bowls in the circle, and just got this lovely vision of these threads just running in and out and around these bowls, and the sound and what the sound makes those threads do. And yeah, visually feels very beautiful. And it's really interesting, isn't it, that feeling that you get with ceremony, how it just drops and it lands. It lands at the reflective time. It lands in your body rather than just in your mind. Puts it into space and time. And so now we're coming to that completion of this 7-year cycle. Are you feeling, do you have any ideas of where now and what the future might hold with the podcast, or for your journey, or how the evolution of the podcast, evolution of the book, how has that been? Where do you feel like that might be going?
It's all unfolding. One thing that feels important is to invite the pause at this moment with the podcast, and to allow a questioning of, is this still relevant? Is this still the right format? Is this the right thing? Do you, this community, want it? How can we weave deeper together and hold each other more energetically through, which is a lot for me what the online space is. Yes, it's coming to some Zoom calls, but more than that, it's an energetic presence and holding. And yeah, I'm definitely going to take some space over the next weeks to check in of where this wants to go next, and where life wants to go next, and how are those things aligned. And I've also just finished recording a course called Reclaim Your Intuition. It feels really good. It's based in ritual and transmissions and energy. I wanted to make a course, now having written the book and talked about the book for a good few years now, teaching workshops on intuition and hearing what people's questions are, and coming back time and time again. And I've said so many times that I would never have chosen this subject as my thing, but it came to me.
It chose you.
Yeah. And so here we are. It's actually what I believe to be the most radically important skill of these times. Not just so that we can make better decisions in our day-to-day life that are more aligned, or that we can welcome in more ceremony and ritual and more of the unseen. There's something to really reclaim in our world around reverence and respect and interconnectedness. And we're also living in times of post-truth where there's so much division and there's so much energy being spent to shape our brains and our needs and our desires and our opinions and our wants. And it's happening through this phone that we all have this very intense love affair with and spend a lot of time on. With intuition comes discernment. With intuition comes self-knowing. With intuition comes the ability to read between the lines. And it feels like those are really the skills that we really need right now. And it has to come away from this well-being, success-oriented space. And I feel like that's another reason why it felt like a really good time to deepen through the interfaith ministry and actually really honor relationship with spirit and our sacredness, and differentiate between that and what's become this very like noisy, commodified well-being world where beautiful, sacred, ancient practices are kind of being used to uphold actually the system rather than to anchor us into seeing a different pathway that feels more aligned and more true. And I do see so much changing and transforming, and I see so many people coming into a much deeper sacred relationship and reclaiming these practices in that way of deep honoring. It's happening, and there's a lot of spaces where it's not happening. And so I really feel like what I've tried to put together with this intuition course is an experience that is transmission based, where it's about reshaping us energetically. And it's also very much about you, the person doing it, having really powerful direct experiences through the rituals and the energetic activations, so that then you bring more of your own knowing and truth and connection online. So that feels really exciting, and I'm really looking forward to sharing that with the world. It's been my main focus over these last few months of really, really sitting with how can you teach the thing that is completely unique for everybody and that is quite hard to explain in a way where it's not just learning some silly little tricks kind of thing, but it's actually really about having like a really deep rooted experience of your own intuition in a different way.
It feels like really important work that you're bringing through. In fact, I want to come on it.
And that to me is really important, because I feel like the things that have been spoken about in this podcast, you know, they can be really big concepts, and we have to be able to integrate things into our day-to-day, not need to be away somewhere else where everything's perfect, because that's not the world, and that's not most people's experience of the world. Many people in this world are living in a very, very different way to that kind of freedom and choice and expression. And I feel like we have to be present in the spaces that we are, so that we can bring all of the incredible wisdom that has come through, in my case, and hopefully all of your cases listening to this. And one channel of that has been these 400 hours, 300 hours, which is, you know, I don't know, when I went to university, I think I had 5 hours a week. So it's been a real education. And the invitation for me has been to not just hear words, but actually
percolate,
be transformed. Be transformed by the words and the energy of what's shared, and bring that into my daily life, which is often very unglamorous.
Yeah. It's funny, isn't it, that how we look at people and how we project on how their lives will be, but at the same time, it's a slog, you know, and yeah, it's real life. But if we can weave threads and specialness and ceremony and ritual and keep bringing meaning and deeper meaning to our lives, it really helps us to flourish and flower and feel that we have a deeper connection to ourselves and others. And isn't that what we're here for?
Absolutely. And a lot of the ceremony and the ritual that I do in my life isn't always just for me as well. And it's part of the way that I show up for things that are happening in the world, or things that are happening in other parts of society. And we have a lot of power in our ceremony and in that space to send energy into different directions and to people that really need it. I feel like that's a really important part of this, is recognizing how we bring that in for us and how we bring it in for each other and for our connection to the earth and on a much wider space.
Dreaming in to what you've birthed here, where you've got to now, and what the journey has been, and coming and sharing this, it brings, as ever, with anything that someone's doing, the ripples that affect others. It's really impacted me greatly and really inspired me for taking that breather and taking that space and trusting. Yeah. Like I said, I think I want to come on your intuition course.
What do you feel you've received from all the podcasts that you've listened to?
I think what I find touches me greatly when I look at the sort of broadness of your podcast rather than individual ones, which each one I find has so many beautiful nuggets in them. But when I look at them as a whole, and I've talked about this a fair bit already, is I really enjoy not only the conversation, but it is that you are wanting to celebrate these people that you have brought your guests on, but also that you often bring up how everybody has a voice and everybody's voice is worth listening to. That really lands greatly for people at home who don't feel like they are necessarily any big achievers or are being the stay-at-home parents or whatever it is, that really lands deeply for people like that. And I have felt that myself. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you for sharing. And thank you for holding this beautiful space for us.
Yeah. Thank you.
My name is Ilana, and I have listened to this podcast from all over the world, and I've lived all over the world. And in this moment, I get to celebrate from 15 minutes away from where Amisha is, which feels like a perfect full circle of 7-year cycle in and of itself. I don't know the exact maths, but that's around 28 episodes a year for 7 years. I was just reflecting when I first got your email about what those 7 years have been in kind of the history of us as humans and the territory you've covered in that time. It's like a beyond a celebration. It's like a profound honoring of your unwavering commitment to show up for this amidst what has been an ongoing global unfolding and whatever you've gone through in your own life, just that somehow you have still shown up fully and totally and wholeheartedly in service. And it's astounding. I got to meet you at the beginning of this journey. And so to be here 7 years on, 200 episodes later, without knowing a fraction of what you've lived through and knowing a hint of it and what the world has gone through, I just want to take a moment to deeply salute you and your commitment and devotion to love. So thank you.
My name is Shanann, and I am a healer, therapist, body tracker, and teacher living in Mid Wales. I really want to add my voice of gratitude and celebration for your podcast, Amisha, and all the team of All That We Are, because I think it's amazing what you're putting out into the world. The quality of conversations, the depth of conversations, the breadth of conversations, they continually touch my heart and feed and nurture those parts of me when I listen to them. And I really, really want to give great gratitude for all that you're doing in the world. And in particular, I want to give great gratitude for the episode with Ebian. It was just amazing and brilliant. And thank you so much for doing that one. It was really awesome. Yeah, good luck for the next 200. I'll be listening.
I'm Barbara J. Hunt, and the first time I ever heard a podcast that you'd done was the one with Jem Bendell, the one about deep adaptation. And I was really delighted that there was a podcast that was covering all the kinds of subjects that I was really interested in. And it's really been a pleasure to have been a guest talking about forgiveness and co-hosting the forgiveness field that we did together, the global forgiveness field. So I want to also thank you for giving room for my work as well. And also that I loved the live weave that we did, the Mbakum experience, which was just joyful, and really appreciated your sense of humor but your such grace when you lead rituals. I really loved being in the space with you and meditating with you. I loved that you left so much space for us to kind of make the prayer. So I just feel full of appreciation that there are these depths of conversations out in the world. So many of us have been resourced by being able to listen and also to share our part in the big weave. So thank you.
I want to express my appreciation for maintaining the communication that allows us to be a global community. Today, I sit with my tears for the babies born prematurely in Gaza, separated from their mothers, for the children who watched their parents being murdered, for those babies that have been lost due to the ignorance of men. I speak from a place that I am defining as mother consciousness, as Agni leadership, from a place that could be hopeless, but which is instead insistent on rising. The power of podcasts and all communication that links a global community with each other in the name of humanity, in the name of compassionate civilization, is of the highest importance, the greatest value in these times. The acceleration of barbaric degradation will continue, and we will rise. We will rise because of all that we are. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Eva, and I'm a cultural producer based in Croatia. I'm also a community organizer and creative community project manager. I'm a social activist and theater educator, linking those two and a meaningful social engagement. I'm an embodiment practitioner in making. I'm also a poet in action. I'm using this opportunity to express my gratitude for the space you created with so much care and beauty and eloquency and so much vision. And I want to tell you how much it means to me to be reminded that there are incredible, beautiful people, brave hearts that are birthing new world and a more beautiful future at this moment. And it serves as an inspiration and a reminder for me, who feels like quite a lonely warrior and a dreamer in a place where not a lot of people really are involved with social change or generally like community building stuff. So it's of so much importance for me to know that out there is a family of like-minded souls and people who really hold the vision alive. So yeah, I just want to wish you a lot of joy in creation of the next 200 episodes. There are people who really, really find so much meaning in what you guys share and the dream you hold alive. So yeah, thanks, and know that you're loved. Thank you.
I'm Sharon. I find the times that I'm listening that whatever it is that you're talking about is really resonating with me. So I don't know how that works, but maybe it's just something in the ether or in the general collective that's really kind of special for me. So thank you.
Hi, I'm Anna. I'm based in London, and I am an advanced social worker practitioner and assistant team leader in a looked after children's team in West London, working with children who's been sexually abused, trafficked, and accompanied asylum-seeking children. But I'm also a yoga teacher, healer, and a social activist. And I've been listening to All That You Are podcasts, and it started with The Future is Beautiful. And I'm just recording this to celebrate the podcast that I think is totally amazing. And I want to send some love and honor the podcast. And Amisha really is so devoted and shares from a deep soul connection and devotion that you really sense throughout the podcast. It's so beautiful that it weaves deep tantric practices, sharing from amazing teachers like Sienna Selicampton, Ola Umadis Motuli, Haresh Wallace, with teachers of social activism, decolonization, with a deep connection to Mother Earth and indigenous practices. The podcast has given me that I don't feel alone being on this path as a social activist. I really found a community, and I find that I usually being questioned that why are you a social worker? Why don't you work with spirituality, but I think being a social activist and a social worker is deep spiritual practice. And I think the podcast really shows that you can't turn away from the pain and the suffering in the community, in the world, and Mother Earth. And you need to face the difficulties and face it with deep love and transform with love. I really learned a lot. I get a voice to voice things that I couldn't voice before. I got tools how to deal with decolonization. I learned about indigenous practices, plant medicine, and mostly I kept my flame burning and the hope for a brighter future. So lots of love and gratitude to Amisha and the team.
And so there we are, episode 200, our 37th podcast this year. Thank you for being part of this journey with us. I want to say a big thank you to our team, Mary for the sound editing. This episode is a fine example of the beauty of her work with so many moving parts. And to Anna Gret, who crafts the edit notes, words, and visual identity of the podcast with such grace. Pau, who recently joined us, bringing some nourishment and hosting into the community space. And you for giving us your time and showing up for this collective ride. If you feel moved to share with us what this means to you and what you have received from the past 7 years, whether it's been one episode or all of them or anywhere in between, we would still love to hear. It really does help us know if to continue, how to continue, and so forth. You can write to us or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. And definitely give me a hug if you see me in person anywhere. I want to thank all our guests for who they are in the world and for weaving into all that we are. The most popular episode by far in terms of how many of you listened this year and how many of you shared it is with Sophie Strand. Other favourites of the year include our tribute to my beloved teacher, Sally Kempton, our episodes with Zach Bush and Ebian Zanini, as well as our live episode with Sam Lee. Keep listening, keep sharing the podcast with your friends, and stay committed to this path of embodying love in the most real way, unafraid for your heart to break open, committed to your values and integrity, here to evolve through each day. I can share that this year has been a testing one personally. So many things have unfolded that I never imagined that have been deeply challenging. And yet, through it, I am ending the year feeling a little bit spacious and definitely like I am dancing with grace in full recognition of all that we are and all that we are becoming. You can find out how to join our membership, the All That We Are Collective, and reclaim your intuition in the show notes and on our website. Please don't be shy. Get in touch. Make yourselves known to us. It's really what it's all about. Thank you for sharing this journey of life with me. Thank you for listening. We hope that you have enjoyed this episode and it has sparked some inspiration and creativity in you. As always, you can find links to everything we mention in this episode, download our book, and discover so much more over on allthatweare.org. We give space to our guests to share their perspective without debating it or fact-checking, as this approach allows for deep, unedited conversations from the heart. We trust your discernment and wisdom to take what is useful and challenge what isn't in your own understanding. We offer spaces for discussion and integration in our membership community, which we would love for you to join. We don't believe in selling you things you don't need through this podcast, and so it's made possible by you, our beautiful community. If you loved this and would like to connect more deeply with us, please join our membership. You choose what you contribute based on our sliding scale, and you become a patron whose support makes this podcast happen, as well as receiving access to a library of many resources and invitations to nourishing events. Please also hit subscribe and leave us a review wherever you listen so others can find us. This podcast is made by an all-female global team. Me, Amisha Gadiali, producer and host, Anna Greta Folderbach, who crafts the words that accompany each episode, and Mary Chan, who edits the sound so skillfully. All That We Are celebrates all that we are already and the untapped potential that lives inside us. It invites the full power of the more than human world, nature, the unseen, our ancestors and our future generations. It reminds us that we never exist in silo, through borders, timelines, or polarity, that in each and every moment, all that we are is here.